In the world of microphones and audio, there are few companies with as rich of a backstory as Shure mics. Their mics have the reputation of being some of the toughest and most rugged mics on the market, but how did they get there? Also, how did they achieve their legendary status? Well, to get that moniker, and frankly, the kind of clout that Shure can brag about these days, you have to create something special. So let's take a look at what Shure put on the market. But first, a quick history of the company. Shure started as a one-man operation on April 25th, 1925 by Sidney N. Shure at 19 South Wells Street in downtown Chicago. Now, it wasn't a microphone company back in the day. Instead, Shure focused on components for people that were building their own radios. Interestingly enough, radios weren't in massive production, and if you wanted one without selling everything off that you owned, you would build and fix your own. And the Shure Radio Company was one of the companies that would mail you the parts that you needed. Now, over the next few years, the company grew and prosperity was in the cards by 1928 as the company moved to a larger headquarters at 335 West Madison Street in Chicago. But by 1929, the Great Depression blanketed the United States, and the Shure Radio Company wasn't exactly immune. At the same time, though, radio production started to kick into high gear, and the radio kits that was the bulk of Shure's business quickly became rather obsolete. In a move to shore up some more income for the business, Shure signed on with Ellis Electrical Laboratories as an exclusive distributor. What are you asking, did Ellis make? Why, of course, microphones. And within 2 years of distributing mics for another company, Shure decided to get in on the game and develop their first. But before we talk about that shiny new mic rolling off the assembly line and why it was such a big deal, we should talk about the state of the microphone market in the early 30s. Now, condensers were being made, but at the time they were the new technology and hadn't come close to market domination yet. And that was due to several issues. Mainly, though, it was money. The most affordable and decent mic was the carbon mic, and yet they were still expensive as they were big, bulky, and heavy. The most affordable mics at the time were crystal mics, and dynamics were available, but at the time they also suffered for being big, bulky, and very expensive. There were other issues, but we'll get to that in a bit. So to sum it up, there were zero options for microphones that were affordable, practical, and in any way small. That is, until the Shure Model 33N came out in 1932. Now, the first thing that this microphone excelled at was price. You have to remember, microphone technology was cutting edge at the time, so the idea that the average person could afford it was massive and lent itself to appeal immediately. The microphone retailed for $50, which wasn't a small amount of money by any means, but even with the exchange value, it's only about $1,100 in today's money. Not only that, though, it wasn't long before the lineup expanded with the 22N and the 5N, which were more affordable at $25 and $10 respectively. There was even a handheld version called the 11N for $15. The second reason it made a huge impact is the mic was built as small and as light as possible for the day. Most of the mics were built like tanks and weren't exactly discreet. And finally, the microphone was actually aesthetically pleasing. Yeah, that was a thing even back then. But even after all that, it was a great way to get on the world stage for mic production, but it wasn't exactly blowing anyone away, especially considering carbon mics were slowly being replaced by the new technologies. So Shure kept throwing their hat in the ring with a condenser mic called the Model 42 and started working on a dynamic solution for that burgeoning tech as well. And while it wasn't anything new for a concept, the dynamic microphone technology of the day had a whole bunch of drawbacks, and Shure set out to fix them all. You see, at the time, dynamic mics were nothing new. The idea was patented in 1877 by a German engineer named Ernst Werner von Siemens. Yep, that's Siemens. In the 1920s, one of the most popular microphones at the BBC was the magnetophone by the Marconi Sykes Company. In fact, the usage of that mic was exclusively owned by the BBC. And the first publicly available dynamic mic was the Model 618A by Western Electric. Now, those mics were all hailed as some of the best on the market, and it was super clean sounding compared to the carbon mics of years past. There was no way, though, to have a cardioid pattern on a dynamic microphone without having two separate elements in the same housing. an omnidirectional, and a figure 8. Now, that is the reason all mics were super bulky and actually quite inconsistent. This is what stopped Dynamics from completely taking over the world at that time. And this is where Shure came in clutch and started earning that legendary status. It was true innovation that was needed in order to capture the microphone market, and that was what Shure was hell-bent on. In 1933, they hired chief engineer Ralph Glover, and in 1937, they hired acoustical development engineer Benjamin Bauer. And Bauer is the one that developed the way to achieve a cardioid polar pattern without needing both capsules. He did this with a baffling system that allowed the capsule to have off-axis rejection. And that technology was called uniphase, and it allowed for a single capsule to offer either cardioid, supercardioid, or hypercardioid polar patterns. And this was successful for many reasons. Manufacturing costs were a fraction of other brand mics. The weight was a fraction. Feedback was greatly limited, and the noise floor of the mics was almost non-existent, or at least when compared to the other mics on the market. And in 1939, they released the infamous Model 55 microphone in 3 different types with low, medium, and high impedance. And it was only $45, even cheaper than what they sold their carbon mic for. And yeah, it was also sexy as hell. This thing was not only one of the best sounding mics on the market, it was also one of the best looking. In a world where microphones were being built and sold as utilitarian and professional furniture, Shure was making it something that people wanted to get photographed with. And this is where we separate the ordinary from the legendary. You see, Shure didn't just build it and rest on it. They continued to develop, tweak, and all around improve on the initial design. In fact, over the coming years, the Unidyne Model 55 underwent multiple iterations, and even up until 2017, the capsule was still being updated. Over the 40s, Shure joined the US war effort by providing the T-17B mic, which was the most widely used mic by the US Army and Navy. This led to an interesting point in their history where they adopted mil-spec, or the military standard of reliability, for all the products they were making. Something that even shows today if you need to hammer a nail with an SM58. Now, the 50s were just as strong for the company, kicking off with the introduction of the Unidyne 55S in 1951, the first handheld wireless mic for performers in 1953, and in 1959, they developed the world's first end-firing unidirectional mic, the Model 545 Unidyne 3, the inspiration for what is coming next. Again, as I said, they didn't just build a capsule and rest on it. Much like the original Unidyne, the Model 545 was amazing and mold-breaking, but it wasn't perfect. So Shure continued on. And in 1965, they dropped the first SM series microphone, the Shure SM57, and well, you could say it made some waves. Not only was it the ultimate performance mic, but the rugged and reliable build meant that it was the ultimate everything mic. Even the US government saw this and made it the standard go-to mic for the White House, and it has been since it was released. In the very next year, the legendary silhouette for live performance mics is set as the SM58 is released. Again, much like the SM57, all the benefits with a bit more plosive protection and that easily identifiable ball head. And they just didn't stop there. The Unidyne 3 continued getting tweaked and rehoused, as Shure released the SM7 in 1973. Now, it's a bit hard to believe, but this is also where the success of Shure kind of faltered. The SM7 was referred to as an SM57 on steroids, but quickly got pigeonholed as a broadcast microphone. And this is because it was, at least on the surface, a direct relation to the SM5B, which was released a few years prior. Not that the SM7 wasn't fully capable for that workload, but the design was kind of hard to shake, and it seemed to sit in the same weight class as the Electro Voice RE series. It maintained this status for over a decade, until Quincy Jones decided to use it for most of the vocals on Michael Jackson's Thriller album. That said, it still didn't create the market saturation that it should have, and as Shure was used to with the rest of their SM series. Then in 1999, it got a revamp with the SM7A. The humbucking coil and the yoke mount got a massive update, yet still, it didn't crush the market. At least not to the level that the SM57 and 58 were. Then in 2001, there was a little more tweaking done and the world was introduced to the SM7B. Though it had the altered name, it was mainly the introduction of the larger windscreen that set it apart from the SM7A. And again, it didn't blow the doors off in sales. That is, as Shure tells it, around 2008 when it lost its anonymity with the wider public with podcasting taking off. And well, that kind of seals up the story, doesn't it? And yeah, I get it. I glossed over a lot of Shure products on their way to becoming the most recognized microphone company in the world. Their success is truly rooted in their inability to rest on their laurels. They never stopped developing their product. And this seems to be something that is common with the top brands in audio gear. That constant need to be better, the constant push to redevelop and reimagine. It's almost 100 years of history as well as research and development in those mics. So yeah, the legendary status seems to fit pretty well. Cheers and thanks for watching.